Well, that's okay, because more than 95% of all those in the conference were very excited.
That is House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. My interview this morning brushing off concerns that some very vocal Republicans will not support this debt limit deal. Time now for our Sunday Group. Washington correspondent for Bloomberg TV and Radio, Annemarie Hordern. Former Biden campaign surrogate Kevin Walling. Fox News contributor Charlie Hertz, and former Special Assistant for National Security to President George W. Bush, Michael Allen. Thank you all for being here with us this morning.
Good morning.
Hey, Shannon.
Okay, so Charlie, I want to start with what you heard from the House passed bill from a couple weeks ago.
Well, it's kind of amazing if you stop and think about it at a time where families across America are all having to make double-digit decreases in their spending to deal with inflation. You've got companies cutting across the board, laying people off in order to deal with the current environment. And it's like the federal government, and you have this in one entire party here. You have the federal government that always gets a pay raise, no matter what. They get more money, no matter what. And you have an entire party that is completely dedicated to ensuring that it gets bigger and bigger every year, no matter how much hardship that puts on regular people. But this is a tremendous accomplishment for Speaker McCarthy. He didn't, no one thought that he would get this. I think the reason that he managed to get President Biden at the table, he's correct about this, is that nobody thought he would get the original proposal in the first place.
Or that he would become Speaker at some point.
Or that he would become Speaker.
Back.
And he's done that. And he did manage to get this across the threshold for, even though he's up against, he has a bare majority up against the Senate, up against the White House, but still, we're still talking about like single, 1% percentage points holding spending down, slight increasing in outgoing years. The problem is still there. And it has to be dealt with. But I think that given what he's up against, this is a big victory for him.
Well, and Kevin, you heard him say, and you heard Congressman Himes sort of concede, it doesn't sound like there's a lot of great stuff in this for Democrats. Although some of them are touting wins that the work requirements didn't go nearly as far as Republicans would have wanted and those kinds of things.
Well, Shannon, it's a good thing for Democrats and this president in that we don't default. And I think the majority of the American people don't really understand this process and would hold the president accountable if that happened on his watch. But listen, I think you have Democrats out there touting the fact that Medicaid is fully intact, protecting those 21 million Americans on that benefit. It actually expands, as the speaker talked about, it actually expands eligibility for SNAP and TAMF with regards to the homeless, veterans in this country. It doesn't touch at all the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a goal of the speaker. That's fully intact. Doesn't touch at all the president's policies on student loan forgiveness. So there are a lot of good things in this agreement for Democrats. And Shalonda Young, Steve Ricchetti worked really hard to make sure that those all stayed in place.
Okay, I want to make sure we get to 24 because we have some new players on the scene this week. Gosh, it seems like Senator Tim Scott got in Monday, but that seems like a month ago. And now we have DeSantis in, two new big entrants to this thing. And the New York Times had a really interesting piece talking about the plan to help DeSantis make up a lot of ground. They say key political groups supporting Ron DeSantis' presidential run is preparing a $100 million voter outreach push. So big, it plans to knock on the door of every possible DeSantis voter at least 4 times in New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, and 5 times in the kickoff Iowa caucuses. Annemarie, that is quite an undertaking.
Yeah, it is, but he's very well known in Florida, but he's still trying to get his national appeal up. So this is why he's leaving Florida this week. He's going to have a huge kickoff event in Iowa, and it's because he has to be nationally known. The former president leads him drastically.
20, 30 points.
Yeah, sometimes in some polls it's even higher, 30-40%. And that's because the former president has a huge control on 30% of the base. He's obviously nationally known. He actually held the office. So DeSantis needs to make this outreach. And at the moment, some of the media or news coverage around him was actually this failure to launch, as the Trump campaign is calling it, because it was 26 minutes on this Twitter space.
I was on there. How many of us were on the Twitter space waiting?
Well, I was having some issues at some moments, but it was only 26 minutes in. We only heard from the governor saying, I plan to run for president, and it wasn't even on camera. I think it was the first president since FDR that we didn't even see the face.
Yeah.
So this has to be a huge push for them, right? They have a ton of money. He has a ton of money left over. He ran for governor. He brought in $8.2 million in his first 24 hours announcing. That's quite, an accomplishment for them. But he has to be known, and that's why they need to get out there.
Well, and somebody who else is getting out there, we talked about this last week, Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. He had an ad out that kind of raised eyebrows. It's him and President Reagan at the Reagan Library. There were questions about that. This week he had another ad out called Parents Still Matter. This is by his PAC. And the New York Post has this report. Not only has Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin told confidants he's reconsidering a 24 presidential bid, but he's also privately been meeting with prospective donors, telling them he is open to entering the race if he sees a path.
This is a great story for the Republicans. We have a deep bench. We've got Ron DeSantis. We've, of course, got Glenn Youngkin. Both of them, I think, are in touch with where the Republican base is. They're both fighters. They both care very much about the state of the economy. And, of course, they care very much about education. That was exhibited by both of them during COVID. I think both of them have a terrific shot going forward. I think they're both fighters, and that's what I think Republican primary voters want. They want to be able to win the next election so that we can make more progress on all of our priorities.
Yeah, we'll see what those ads turn into, what they actually mean. Okay, but quickly I want to get to this because polling out this week is really tough from CNN. A whopping 66% of Americans view a Biden victory in the upcoming presidential election as either a disaster or a setback for the United States. Kevin, 2/3 of the country think that re-electing their current president would be a disaster or setback.
Well, we've got about 15 months to shift that narrative, and the president's going to get back out there on the campaign trail. The vice president is playing a really active role. She gave the first commencement address at the West Point for a woman to address those cadets. So I think, again, as the president says all the time, and if you're watching at home, take a drink. Don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And the message is going to play out on the Republican side.
Man, if we had a drinking game during Fox News Sunday, don't start too early. Maybe it's a mimosa. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, panel, do not go too far.